Hi, this is Ina Langerman from Violinna.live, helping you along your musical journey. I received an excellent question in one of my videos on spiccato. Should the wrist be flexible, or does the majority of the flexibility come from the fingers? And this is a great question, and I will try my best to explain some of the mechanics behind this bow stroke, at least things that I may have left out in my previous videos and to be more clear. And I will also share some of my personal thoughts regarding flexibility. This is actually something that can get very confusing for those who are working on improving their spiccato stroke. Now, before we start, please understand that everything I say in this video are general guidelines, and they're not to be a replacement for private lessons or some kind of shortcut. If anyone is offering you a shortcut, I suggest to run the other way, or just to be wary, because there is really no replacement for hours of trial and error we spend in the practice room alongside guidance from a good teacher. If you are taking private lessons and anything I mention in this video is the complete opposite of what your teacher is telling you, you're probably better off listening to your teacher. That's because everybody learns differently, and we all need different kinds of attention in different aspects of our playing and development and all kinds of things. And these are things that cannot be solved in a YouTube video by a random violinist. So first of all, spiccato is actually not all that different from the Detache bow stroke, a smooth Detache, if you have a relaxed, supple bow hold with a nice balanced distribution among the fingers. With that said, we need to consider the mechanics of Detache. So the movement, it primarily comes from the forearm, right? Or sometimes the upper arm if we're in the lower half. It comes from the larger muscles. The smaller muscles in our wrist and our fingers are what help us to more efficiently distribute the weight of the bow as we go through the different parts of the bow that would allow us to play an up bow just as strong as the down bow, which is a very difficult skill actually. You see that without developing strength and flexibility in the fingers, it's easy for the down bow to become too strong in relation to the up bow. It makes the strong uneven and unreliable, unless that's the kind of sound we're going for. Now, when it comes to spiccato, I'm sure that you've noticed that by watching a lot of great players, you might have noticed that their wrist and maybe their fingers, they're also moving. So with some players, this is more noticeable than with others. Unfortunately, this is where a lot of the misunderstanding about how spiccato works comes from. And it's important to understand that this movement that you see in the hand, it's not done intentionally, and it's just a follow-through of the arm motion. So the hand and wrist, they actually need to be really, really relaxed in order for spiccato to be even, and so that the motion from the arm, which is the leader of the bow stroke, this is the leading muscle group in spiccato, is the forearm or the upper arm, depending on what speed we're doing, what part of the bow we're at. Notice that I said relaxed as opposed to flexible. Now, we do need some basic flexibility skills, and actually Colle is good to have in our arsenal to help us out, but only as needed. So the Colle bow stroke, which looks a little more like this, or at the tip, it's a common exercise for anybody working to improve all of their bow strokes. It's a great tool to have just to really improve our sound production in general. Notice that the mechanics of Colle by itself, the way I just did, it's very different from a spiccato, because that's where we are really focused on developing that strength and flexibility in the hand, primarily the fingers. Now in spiccato, there is such a thing as being too loose, too flexible, especially in the wrist. We need to be careful that the wrist doesn't get too floppy, because then we won't have the stability or even distribution required to keep that bow stroke consistent and even. So what we are after is we actually want to create a balance between stability and flexibility. Otherwise, spiccato is going to be really unpredictable. It's like rolling dice in a casino. Who knows what kind of sound will come out? We don't want that. But what we do want is a really relaxed bow hold. And it's the kind of that will allow the energy to flow from and transfer the sound from a forearm into the bow, into the string, out the violin. So really the main difference between Detache and Spiccato is one of them is on the string, the other is off the string. Oh, and Detache we can play in the upper half, whereas Spiccato we mainly stick to the lower half of the bow or just right in the middle if we're going quickly. Otherwise, for both strokes, the forearm and sometimes the upper arm are the main drivers. Now the little motion in the wrist or fingers, it's simply a rebound, and it's for adjusting the weight distribution as needed. Now if you imagine you're bouncing a ball, whether it's a basketball or just a small tennis ball, the wrist will only move as much as it needs to, no more, no less. And another way you can feel it, feel this balance, is to simply notice what your hand is doing when you're walking down the street casually with your arm swinging by your side. Your wrist will probably fall into its naturally relaxed state. It's not too stiff, it's not stiff like this, nor is it super floppy doing all kinds of weird motions. Whatever that natural state is, that's what we need in our bow hold. So if you transfer this kind of feeling into the bow, so if you put your bow right in your hand and don't really do anything, you might feel like your bow is gonna slip, it's gonna fall. That's actually a really good thing. It means you're on the right track. So essentially the thumb will be counter pressure to the bow hold, it's counterweight. And the violin is really gonna catch the bow. The bow is designed to bounce. If you have a good bow with a nice camber, it'll do most of the work for you, if you let it. We don't want to force the bounce. The bow will rebound on its own, and our fingers can be like little shock absorbers. So if you ask me, what is a good ratio between flexibility and stability? Well, to tell you the truth, this is something you're going to have to experiment on your own. And on top of that, remember that every bow is different and it has a different spot where it will bounce the best. In some it'll be in the middle, in others it'll be a little closer to the balance point. There are also many different schools of thought with regards to the wrist position in relation to the rest of the arm and the arm position, things like that. I usually recommend to keep the wrist a little bit higher than the knuckles. Generally, we do want to avoid being too low with the wrist. If the wrist is on the same level as the knuckles, which is very helpful in other bow strokes, in Spiccato, that doing this or even being too low, it can create unnecessary tension and it makes us work too hard. So generally, I would hold my arm and the wrist just slightly above the level of the hand. So you see the hand is more natural this way. And this is true, I think, for any speed of spiccato. Now, you might notice that as the spiccato gets faster and faster, we're going to hit a threshold at one point where the wrist will begin to take over as the leader from the forearm. This is where we are entering Sautille land, which is actually an on the string bowstroke technically. It sounds like a really fast spiccato, but actually Sautille is a really fast detache right in the middle of the bow where it starts on the string, but if you have that same kind of feeling in your hand as you do with the good spiccato, the bow will start bouncing on its own. So I hope this sort of answers the question. I know it can seem kind of complicated, and as I mentioned before, you will really have to do a lot of trial and error. Sometimes just trying different bows can actually teach you quite a bit about just how much a bow can do for you and make you work less. So keep experimenting, don't give up, be curious, and you can totally, I recommend to treat your practice room a little more like an experiment laboratory. And you might even discover some things that you haven't done in your lessons, which is great. Remember, online courses and videos can give you excellent tools that you can work with, but after that, it's really a long-term commitment. There are no shortcuts. If a shortcut seems to be working for you and you're really excited, that's great, but you might notice that it's only in the short term, and eventually you're going to have to retrace your steps and do some of the things that you missed along the way. And that's okay, you know, I'm speaking from experience. I'm sure this is something that happens to everyone at some point. What I notice is that many people give up way too early and get frustrated so easily that they start to seek novelty too frequently by trying another new approach again and again before giving an older one, enough of a chance. It really does take time. Be patient and enjoy the process. That's it for this video, folks. If you got any value from it, I would really greatly appreciate if you give this video a like and share it with a friend or a colleague. Let me know your biggest takeaway in the comment section below. And if you have not done so already, go ahead and grab your free practice template PDF in the description below. Upon doing so, you're going to be getting access to all my latest blogs and videos twice a month and be able to reach me directly. Until next time, happy practicing.